Greetings from the Philippines. I made it back here in one piece from Australia. In this video, I want to talk about preparing for an operating system switch by looking at the data, deciding what you want to keep, what you don't want to keep, what you might need to convert, and what you might want to back up. You do backups, right? The requirements for backups are a little different when we're talking about an operating system switch than for long-term storage, but we'll get into that. Assuming you are switching from Windows to Linux, the subject can get a bit complicated for a couple of reasons. Compatibility of Windows backups with Linux, general file compatibility, conversion of non-compatible files, hidden files, linked folders, and linked files, and then files that are downright just not compatible and you can't do a thing with. This video will explore how I handle things, which is probably different from how you should be doing things, but again, this is just hopefully give you some ideas, something to think about anyways or consider. Backing up for an operating system switch of necessity tends to be somewhat different than your standard backup. In my case here, I'm going to be going totally manual for reasons that I hope become apparent shortly. The backup is not for long-term storage, however, but to get the data moved. That's, again, the main purpose is just to get the data moved, not long-term storage. So we're not really overly concerned about the media as long as it has enough space. I don't compress, and I won't be setting up any error recovery that some other backup programs might use. Like I say, I'm doing this manually. This backup only has to be short-lived, long enough to switch operating systems. I do apologize for the time gap between this video and my last video in this series, as I got hit with several tasks I was not expecting when I returned from traveling. Now I just want to get my schedule to settle down a bit. You'd think this is retirement, that would be easy, but yeah, right. Anyway, on with it. If you watched my previous videos in this playlist and I have not totally scared you away, then I am assuming you have decided to take the plunge and make a switch of your operating system. Also, if you have watched my previous videos, you'll recall I'm trying to maintain a perspective of the typical computer user, which is becoming somewhat more difficult as we progress. Because as of this point, there is a definite increase in the complexity beyond just basic usage. There are things we need to do to get ready for the switch that are little more complicated. A couple of key points I want to highlight before proceeding. Preparation is the key to a successful operating system switch, just like pretty much anything else. I cannot stress enough the importance of sandboxing your new operating system, whether it be a live USB, a spare computer, or a virtual machine. You should run your operating system for some time, and you should play around with it to make sure it's what you want, it meets your needs. Again, I'm not going to be giving any recommendations about specific Linux distros. You need to play around with several distros and see what is a fit for you. So, and just to say before progressing, if you have like 20 gigs of free hard drive space or storage space, it could be SSD, I don't know. There's no reason not to install VirtualBox and virtualize your target operating system. It's not that hard to do. Actually, I did some earlier videos on that. I may do another one, we'll see. In this video, I'll be talking about the following points. What file formats are safe to back up for transfer to your new operating system? That is, you can generally use as is, whether you're in Windows or in Linux. What formats may need a little work or conversion before a transfer. They don't necessarily open in native Linux apps, but there are things you can do about it. And then what file formats will only work under Windows because they have proprietary programs and proprietary formats, and they are not keen on sharing with Linux. We know who they are, you probably know also. And how you plan to back up this whole mess is going to be the final point. Again, this video is to get you thinking about file format compatibility and backups. It is not an end-all solution or a how-to video. Everyone's situation is unique. You should be doing your own research and determining what is best for you, not blindly following things I do. In fact, some people might consider a lot of the things I do not really correct, but hey, they work for me. I will be going through some of the things I do along with a few examples. It's going to be up to you to interpret these things in terms of your setup. So you might ignore my suggestions altogether, which is fine. but I just can't stress enough how a little preparation beforehand can really make switching operating systems a much smoother and easier process. All right, let's talk about mostly safe files. This is the first part of file conversion topic. So this is not an exhaustive list, but it should cover about 90% of the files one is likely to encounter as I include the most common types. I will forewarn you that depending on your Linux distribution, some media files may require codecs to be installed. That's a subject for another video, and you should still test, even though they're safe files, one or two or three or a dozen files, whatever you've got time for, just to make sure they are safe and they will work in a Linux app in a native Linux environment. So let's start with image formats. These are your GIFs, your PNGs, your JPEGs or JPGs, your TIFFs, your BMPs. Most standard image formats can be opened by programs like GIMP or Krita, and they'll work just fine, so they should be easy to transfer back and forth between Windows and Linux. Photoshop native format, if you're doing something complex, might be a little rough. Again, something you're gonna have to check out. Common vector file formats, SVG, DXF, extended PostScript, Windows meta files. These, for the most part, transfer okay, but if you're doing something complex or beyond basics, you will want to check them. Things like gradients tend to have issues between file types if you're converting them or opening them in different programs. So again, you'll want to check these, but they should mostly be safe as long as they're fairly simple. All right, I shouldn't say simple, I should say not very complex in setup, that's what I should have said. Audio file formats are next on our list, and these are your WAV files, your MP3 files, your OGG files. Again, these will generally transfer without issue. You may need a codecs for things like MP3s if it doesn't come native in the distribution you picked. A lot of distributions, especially those targeting beginners, tend to load all these codecs at the start. So if you're using one of those, it shouldn't be a problem. If you're using a more lightweight distribution, you might have to do it yourself. Same goes for video file formats, your MOVI, your MPEG-4, your AVIs. Same thing, they may require codecs. Depending on your distribution's target audience, they may be installed or they may not be installed. They should probably be available in one of the repositories for that particular distribution. You're gonna have to look around a little. So let's talk about generally safe Office files. Let's start again. So again, not an exhaustive list, should cover about 90% of the files you're likely to encounter. You should still test the files, a few of them, as many as you can, to at least make sure they are going to work properly under Linux. Document types. Doc and DocX are probably the most common, being your standard Microsoft Word formats, rich text format, text files. ODT is a open source document format, HTML, XML, they should all work. Again, test them. If you're doing overly complex formatting, there might be issues, especially with the Microsoft formats, but they should all work pretty much as long as they're not overly complex. Spreadsheets, XLS and XLSX are the Microsoft formats. CSV and database format are another couple of common formats. I noticed I left out the open source formats, ODS, but again, as long as you're not doing something complex with things like Visual Basic, running macros or other operations, if it's your standard spreadsheet, it should work just fine. Database types, generally it's going to be SQL Various or SQLite should work fine. Microsoft SQL has some issues, but like PostgreSQL or Oracle SQL or MySQL or Maria, these all work just fine, regardless of which system they're on. As I say, there might be issues with Microsoft SQL. At least I've always run into a couple. CAD types, again, some of these are safe, some of these are not safe. It'll just depend on the complexity of the file structure. That's something I think you're going to find. If normal, like writing in the doc or word processing file will convert just fine, but if you're doing fancy tables, headers, and things like that, you may run into issues with spacing and layout, but content should transfer over. Okay, let's talk about file conversions for some files that aren't all that safe. I'll give an example of a specific type of file conversion here, but what you can try and do is if you have files that don't copy over and open up properly, is save them in a different format and then try opening those and see if that helps. The example I'm going to give though here is a little more complex, but it'll just give you an idea of things you may or may not need to do. So let's go ahead and get to the example. If you are on Windows and you use the Outlook email client and you have downloaded emails, you may need to convert those emails before you can use them in Linux. If the emails are still on the server, it's no real issue. Most Linux clients will hook up to any of the server types, whether it be POP or whatever. Downloaded emails that are stored in a proprietary format, these are the ones you pulled down, you opened up, you were doing stuff with, those are going to be a problem. Emails are exported from Outlook in a proprietary PST format, which I don't believe there's very many, if any. There might be one Linux equivalent mail client that could open this. I'm not sure. I know most of them don't open this, so you may need to convert this if you're using Outlook. But luckily for us, conversion is not that hard to do. It's a two-step process using a open source cross-platform email client called Thunderbird, which I've talked about in an earlier video. You want to load and install Thunderbird, but you want to have Outlook remain as your primary email client or your default email client. Once Thunderbird's installed, you go to Menu, Tools, Import, and then you tick the Outlook box, and Thunderbird will directly pull mail from Outlook instead of looking in the archive, and it'll save it in its own open source format, which you can then use with other mail clients. Luckily, I haven't had to do this other than work, I haven't used Outlook for years, 10 years at least. I did use it for work, but I stopped using it for personal email a long time ago. But when I did convert over, this is what worked for me. Of course, that's assuming you have important emails you actually want to save. I know most emails I get nowadays are garbage ads. Okay, let's do a quick example. I've got Thunderbird installed. It's not my default mail client on Windows, so let's open it up and take a look. If we go to our menu, my ISP is blocking one of my mail clients. Anyway, let's go to our menu. Let's go to Tools. Let's go to Import. And there's our Microsoft import tick box that will import things from Outlook. And then you can, like I say, save them out of Thunderbird in a open source format. And you'll be done with that. And you'll have converted those files. All right, another important concept we need to hit for your transfer is directory layout. So let's go ahead and take a look at some directory layouts. This is Windows here. And what directory layouts are going to affect is where your archives will store things to. Let's go ahead and look at our home folder. Now, when you normally open File Explorer, this top group of icons is not your home folder, it's your quick access. Let's go find our home folder, which we have to go down to local disk C:. Then we want to look in our local folder, or we want to look in our user folder is where we want to go next. We would C: user folder, users is our user folder. And once you're in your users folder, you want to go to your username. And this is your actual home folder. We also have this public folder, which may or may not have stuff in it. You're going to have to look in here and see. Generally, this is not used unless you're doing a multi-user environment, which most of us are probably not doing, but you might want to check it out just to be on the safe side. So we've got hidden files in this folder, which if you do a shotgun type backup and back up the whole folder, will catch. If you're doing a specific backup for specific files, you have to make them visible. You also see we've got some files in this folder that are actually links, like this music file here shows up here, but it's actually in E:/music. It's one of our quick links, but that's where it shows up. It doesn't show up in your home folder. Well, for me, it doesn't. If you installed Windows without changing any of this, then yes, this will be in your home folder. Me, with a little complex dual boot setup, I moved it. Same with videos. The reason I moved it was so I could access these from both operating systems. I dual booted Linux and Windows, and I wanted to be able to access a lot of files from both. But it's something you want to watch out for if these are linked someplace else or if they're in your home folder. Because they're linked someplace else, you do a shotgun backup of your home folder, it's not going to pick them up. Let's go ahead and look at hidden files. There's a specific hidden folder I want to look at. We did view, hidden files show, and I want to look at the app data file. If we open up this file, we'll find local, low, and roaming profiles. There may be stuff in the first two, but we're mainly interested in the roaming profile. In the local, you'll find things like error logs and stuff like that, crash logs. What you want to go to, though, is the roaming profile. Now, this is where there are some things you might want to back up that you might not think about. For example, we have a GIMP folder here. When you install GIMP on Windows, it stores all the default brushes, text files, or I should say font files, and other things in the program directory in the GIMP folder. However, if you use your own brushes, your own bitmaps, your own stuff, it's going to get stored here. Brushes, icons, fonts, patterns, plugins, anything you install locally that didn't come with GIMP is going to end up here. And surprisingly, this works the same, it's just in a different location on Linux, so you're going to probably want to copy this folder. And if you've got your own stuff for any of these programs listed here, again, C:users, username, app data, roaming, and then your application. Most applications will store the personal data you add to them here. And as I say, this is a hidden file. So next we want to go take a look at a Linux home folder and see how it compares. So we're over here on the Linux side now. We'll open our folders. And you can see it says right up the top, home. So this is our home folder. You'll see I've got the music, video, and you can see by the little icon in the corner of the icon that these are linked files. And if we open one, we can look at where it's pointing. And this is not in our home folder, but this is in server storage videos where I pointed it. It's my shared folder. If you look at the actual path, it's /home/Lee. Again, Linux uses different path names and they store things in different spots. Now, if you look at hidden files, if you're using Thunderbird, you'll find a Thunderbird folder with all your Thunderbird defaults and personal data. We talked about Thunderbird a little earlier. As an email client, you could just copy this over from Windows, you open Thunderbird, and it should just work. There's also a config directory, and if we look in here, we'll find some others. It just depends on the application writer. Here's the GIMP 2.10, and you notice it looks identical to what we had on the Windows side. It's just in a different location with a different file path to get there. But if you copied your GIMP folder across from your app data roaming and pasted it here, the stuff would show up in GIMP and it would just work. Cool, huh? Wish everything switching was so simple. Making backups. If you have a Windows-based backup software that you're using, you need to test its compatibility with Linux. Otherwise, you're going to need to find another solution. A lot of backup software uses fault tolerance, error detecting kind of algorithms that may or may not be compatible between Linux and Windows. Like I say, for my use, I'm going to be doing a manual backup just for this operating system switch. My normal backups follow a different procedure, the ones I want for long-time archive storage. Like I say, there is a difference. You're going to use this backup right away to restore data. So what to back up? Your home folder, again, I said shotgun method is do it all, but if you have a case like mine, folders might not be in your home folder. They might be linked. And you got to remember when you're restoring the difference in the directory names. So your home folder in Windows is C:/users/username, whereas in Linux it's \home\username. This is important when restoring, and if you have like Windows backup based software, it's not going to understand this at all. And like I say, I'm being specific in the stuff I'm backing up. So I'm picking the hidden files I want to back up, and then I'm going to the linked folders. So what I do is generally go in, show hidden files. I display links, copy files manually without compression. This requires more space, but it's easier to review and compare content and compare and validate to make sure I didn't miss anything, which if I had this stuck in a zip archive, I probably would miss something. So this is just a check for myself. Again, as I said earlier, this is the way I do things. You don't necessarily have to do things this way. So now that we've talked about backing up, and I know it was kind of short, but you're going to have to make this decision for yourself, let's talk about methods. Especially if you're not an expert computer user, you probably don't have a lot of backup servers. You probably don't have a NAS on your network or anything. So yes, you can use simple USBs to back up your data. I wouldn't recommend 1 gig or 2 gig ones, but if you have 16 gig, 32 gig, 64 gig, 128 gig, which are all common, you can back your data up onto those. How many you're going to need is going to depend on how much data you actually have to back up. You'd also want to make sure they're USB 3, as it's much faster than USB 2. But again, this is a viable option because we're going to be using this relatively quickly once we install the new OS. And it's not going for long-term storage. All right, another method. You can use an external hard drive. This one happens to be a solid state external hard drive. In fact, it happens to be an external M.2 drive with USB-C. It is extremely fast. You can use mechanical spinning drives. You can use solid state drives. It doesn't really matter. These are much larger. You get these in terabyte sizes. Interestingly, the bigger the drive, the cheaper the cost per terabyte. If you're talking like 2 to 4 terabytes, you can get these for about $25 a terabyte if you shop around for sales. So this is another really viable method of backing up your user data. And it's not that expensive. I use the USBs initially because I happen to have a bunch of them lying around. If you happen to have that, that's great. If not, like I say, these are not that expensive. And they're perfectly valid. Again, you want USB 3, you want the higher speed throughput. Like I say, this one's an M2 drive, and it's, well, under Linux, it's wicked fast. Under Windows, it's kind of slow. Now, if you're a little more advanced, I've got a 2 drive bay caddy here, which I have hooked up to a backup server running on my network. It'll take both 3.5 and 2.5 inch drives, and you can address each drive individually. And again, if you're a computer nerd like me, you probably got a lot of spare hard drives, or both solid state and regular, laying around. And this is a valid method. This could also plug directly into your main computer too, as opposed to being on the network, but also another easy, not too expensive way of doing things. This cheaper 2 drive caddy, I mean, it is a little bit cheap, but I think it cost me about $25 US, but it does work. And you can make use of those old hard drives you have lying around. Again, we're assuming these are in larger sizes. I remember back in the days when a 10 megabyte hard drive was considered large. But yeah, you want to have, 512 gigabytes, a terabyte, whatever. And again, spinning hard drives, or rust drives as we call them sometimes, the cost for terabyte is fairly inexpensive. Now, if you have a spare router laying around, I have a few of them, with a USB port on the back and a external drive. This one's a spinning drive. You could set this up as a network attached storage by turning off all the router functions and turning on the functions for accessing the drive. This router, it accesses the drive via FTP, but you could easily create a simple network attached storage on your network with a setup like this. And these older routers are not expensive. It's not as fast as a direct connect, but it does work. These are things you start when you go to bed and you wake up in the morning and hope they're finished. But this is another cheap alternative if you want an actual network drive to save things to for multiple different computers. And it works pretty good. Okay, let's do an actual example of backing some stuff up manually. This is on Windows. We've got our File Explorer. Let's open another File Explorer. Let's get these lined up properly. And there we go. So we've got one pointing to our external drive. and we've got the other one in our home folder. And remember, these links are not necessarily in your home folder, and if you dragged one over, boom, it just copies the link. It doesn't copy any of the data. So in this case, you're going to have to go to the linked folder and download them from there. So we'll make a folder called music here. Then we'll go to our linked folder, open this folder. Oh, I love waiting for Windows to open file folders. Do you have that problem where File Explorer just sort of freezes on you? Anyway, we were going to go ahead and drag all our folders over and just let them copy. See, we're averaging speeds around 200 to 300. This is the SSD, the solid state drive, the M2 drive. And we just wait for things to copy over, and that folder is now backed up. We've backed up our entire music collection, so to speak. And again, be prepared. Backing up large volumes of data can take time. So just be aware of that up front and make sure you have the time to do it, or if it's something you can start and go do something else and come back to. And almost there, finished, yay. Let's do the same thing from the Linux side, since this is a dual boot system and you can see how it works. On the Linux side of the house, I'm running Arch with a KDE Plasma 6.1 desktop. We're going to set up or do a similar thing with the with the File Explorer, which in the KDE genre is called Dolphin. I'm not suggesting you use a KDE desktop, it just happens to be what I'm using here. So let's go to our video link. If we try and copy the link over, it's just going to copy the link. So we need to go to the file, select the folders we want to copy over. A lot of these are created by Windows applications and we don't really need to copy them. Let's see, it should be other, movies, and anime should be the folders I need to copy over. Oh, I should create a video folder over here first. Let's do that. Open it and let's go ahead, select our folders again and just drag them over. This is mainly to show you things, people say Linux and Windows is different. Well, this seems to work the same way on Windows and Linux. If you're using the, like one of the major desktops, there's not a lot of difference here. I mean, the copy display is a little different, but we're doing 283. See, under Linux, we're doing 400, 500 megabits per second. A little faster than Windows. Just a little. Anyways, another one where you're going to have to wait for things to copy over. So let's go ahead and fast forward and get things copied over. And we're done. Okay, moving on. All right, I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover in this video, so there you have it. I've talked a bit about files that you can safely transfer between Linux or between Windows and Linux, and files that have to be converted, and give an example of a conversion. With programs like Photoshop, you might have to save a file in a different format to get it properly convert so you can open it in GIMP or Krita. Again, I can't stress the importance of sandboxing and testing these things out before you switch operating systems. A little preparation up front can go a long way to making it a very smooth and pleasant experience. And I use the backup format I use, the manual one, again, mainly because I'm going to use this backup right away when I put the new operating system on. It's not a long-term archive storage sort of thing. I want to have quick access. I want to be able to compare files fairly simply, just using the regular file managers. And like I said, this is the first real physical step you need to take in preparing to switch operating systems after you've done your research. So you want to take your time and make sure you get this part right, because you want to make sure you know what files are going to restore properly, which ones you're going to have problems with. And again, I repeat what I said earlier, a little preparation early on. It's going to go a long way to making it a smooth experience when you're switching operating systems. Next time around, I'm actually had a request for an ExpressVPN video I think I'm going to do next time around, but there will be another part to this series which will be planning your OS switch or operating system switch. It's not something you just do. You need to think about what you're doing beforehand. And like I said, I'm going to demonstrate. Well, I'm going to go through what I've got on my computer now and how I'm going to plan to do it in the future. I'm going to use my main computer as it's fairly modern, should be close to what a lot of people are using. I've got another older transformer from ASUS I'm thinking about doing to show using older systems. It's about 10 years old. It's interesting that's got a 32-bit UEFI and a 64-bit processor, but that will be with a different sort of OS. That'll actually be a lot more complicated than what I'll be doing with my main machine. So expect that video in, I don't know, 3-4 weeks. The next video I think I'm going to put out, like I said, I had a request for using ExpressVPN on Linux, so I'm going to do something on that next. So stay tuned. I'll be back.